Hi guys, I'm Josh. I'm here with Trevor Pierce, who's been taking us through the book of Romans. We started chapter 1 last week, and some of the key questions that came out of that is the questions of who am I, who do I belong to? And Trev, so you would argue that who I belong to is the most important question out of those two. Could you just explain why you think that?
Yeah, I mean, our culture, I think if you were to ask most people in our culture, what's the most important question? Who am I, or who I belong to? I think people would jump to the question of who am I? Whereas actually, I think from a biblical perspective, and actually from a reality perspective, who I belong to is far more important. Because who I belong to makes me the person I am. And really Romans begins with that question, who I belong to. And then Paul introduces that and shows a little bit about that in how it applies to himself.
So how does Paul introduce that question?
Well, I think Paul, as he writes this letter, he's basically saying he's owned by two things. He's owned by the message, and he's owned by the one who gives the message, God. So Paul begins by saying he's owned by the message. The message is from God, and he's in debt. What does that mean? He's in debt to everybody to give him the message. God has given him God's message. God has given him the message. God has given him the message, and he's in debt to everybody until he passes that on. And the message is one of power, is one of wrath, is one of mercy. Power because it's from God, wrath because we disobey God, mercy because of the cross. And then secondly, he says he's owned by God's Son. Paul kind of introduces a few things about Jesus. First thing he says is he's promised, talking about the Old Testament, really saying the whole of history is centered on Christ. Secondly, he says he's royal. He has royal blood because he's a descendant of King David. And then thirdly, what is the third thing he says? He's powerful. Why is he powerful? Because he's died and he's risen from the dead, proving that he's the Son of God. So there's those three things he says about Jesus. Now, because he is owned by the message and owned by God's Son, therefore he can belong to him. Not because he's great, but because the person who's chosen him, the person who belongs to him, is great. So, who we belong to makes us the people we are. Paul is saying the gospel is about God bringing us back to who we truly are, to belonging to God.
Awesome, that's very helpful. This week we've been looking at the second half of Romans chapter 1, and there have been a few controversial things that seem to completely jar against what our culture teaches us. Could you just tell us what the Bible says about those things?
Yeah. What Paul is doing, we mentioned last week about who we belong to, but before we belong to God, we've got to realise actually we're by nature sinful. So what Paul does is in Romans, in chapters 1 to 3, he kind of creates a courtroom scene, and he's going to bring in different types of people. So the person he brings in this week is the atheist, the hedonist, the person who lives for pleasure, the person who says there is no God and God can stuff it. Next week we're going to look at the religious person. But what he's trying to show us, he's saying all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Okay, so he brings in the hedonist, he brings in the atheist, and he's going to try and show, or he is going to show, that that person is guilty before God. So there's three things he kind of majors on. The first thing he does is he shows that everybody knows that there's a God. Okay? Everybody knows that God is the creator, by nature, judge, and there's Saviour. Everybody by nature knows that, which is quite controversial. So none of us, there's no such thing as an atheist. All of us know there's a God. Now what do we do with that knowledge? We do three things. We suppress it, we push it down, we pretend it's not there, because we want to rule ourselves. So we get rid of it, we press it down. Paul says we suppress the truth. The second thing we do with it, we exchange it. Now that's really the big thing of Romans 1. Okay? We don't want God, therefore we suppress it. And then thirdly, we take the Creator and then we worship and live for created things instead of the Creator. Because he's too threatening, we want to run around our lives. So we, made in the image, we make an image of ourselves, something we create. And then the God who made us in his image, we then worship the image of an image. It's like a photocopy picture of a picture. And we worship and treat the photocopy better than the picture. Now God is offended at that. He's angry at that. Yet he provides Christ to save us from that. So the first thing we do is we suppress the truth. Second thing, we exchange the truth. And then lastly, we actually then change the truth to suit ourselves. So Paul uses the whole issue of sex and sexuality as an example. We exchange God for a lie, and then we feel we have the right to exchange and to control other areas of our life. I think the picture I gave in the last one is a little bit like person, a child who's told not to eat cookies, and then the mum finds them with their hand in the cookie jar. The parent comes in and says, "You're taking a cookie," and the kid says, "You're fine with cookies. I think it's a biscuit, you think it's a cookie." And that's what we do with our lives. We want to decide what's right or wrong, not God, and we exchange. It's true, we change.
That's really helpful, thanks. Because these are such controversial things, when we're talking with our friends about these, how are we going to be able to convince them that there really is a God? Where do we start?
That's brilliant question. Really what I was trying to do today was give young Christians like yourselves the foundational worldview of understanding the heart of that we all have. So Paul is describing all of us. It's not describing the whole world out there, it's describing all of us. And I tried to show it's like 3 steps into rebellion. Step 1 is we suppress. Step 2 is we exchange. And step 3 is we change. Now what I'm trying to do is get you guys to understand how a rebellious heart works. Then to understand it within our culture. And then once we've done that, we can then begin to think how we're going to display that to the friends. Okay? So that was my first place. Get us all to understand how a rebellious heart works. We've got discussion group question time on Friday, and then we can begin to explore those things.
Cool. So, thanks very much, Trev.
Pleasure.
I look forward to talking about more of Romans with you as we go through the rest of the book.
Cheers, Josh.
So guys, hope you enjoyed that and that you found that helpful as well. We'll be back again soon with some more cheeky Romans. You guys. Romans.